Well, the College Football Playoff Committee told us what they think going into the conference championship games based on who's going to be where in the first round. We get a big picture today of what the College Football Playoff Committee is going to do, and there's very little questions left, and we're going to go over all of that. Make sure you guys check out the YouTube, by the way, if you're listening on audio here, and if you are over here on YouTube, I live stream these, so go and tune into the live stream so I can respond to your comments and stuff towards the end of the video. We're going to get straight into the CFB rankings. Now, make sure you subscribe over there on YouTube and follow on the podcast formats. I will really appreciate that. All right, CFB reaction. I'm going to pop that up over my face here for you visual learners here, or visual learners. Weird thing for me to say, I guess. Visual watchers of the YouTube. Anyway, Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Georgia are your top five. Ohio State edges out Tennessee there at 6, and Tennessee will fall at 7. 8 will be SMU, 9 Indiana, 10 is Boise State, 11 will be Alabama, 12 Miami. So that big debate between Alabama, Miami, Ole Miss, South Carolina, that's been settled by the committee in the most predictable fashion. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Now, you move on. You get Arizona State, Iowa State. Winner gets in. Clemson there at number 17. It's win and get in for Clemson, and it's that simple. They could probably make an argument to be on that bubble if they would have beat South Carolina, and they would probably be ranked right now right where Alabama is at number 11, but they ended up screwing that up. BYU at 18 is fine. Now, Missouri at 19 I still feel is very overrated, but nobody's going to listen to me on that. 20, UNLV, again, win and in. If UNLV does win, though, it shows clearly that UNLV will be the 12 seed. There is no chance that UNLV wins. Clemson wins as well, and Clemson's the 12 seed. So that means that Arizona State and Iowa State, their ceiling is possibly the 3 seed, and the ceiling for Clemson here is the 4 seed, depending on how that Mountain West game goes. Illinois slides in at 21, 22 Syracuse, 23 Colorado, 24 Army, 25 Memphis. So a lot to grasp there, a lot. First, should Alabama be ranked number 11? When you take a look at who's right behind them, it's Miami and Ole Miss. If I'm an Ole Miss fan right now and I was talking on TikTok Live with one of them, I'd be fuming. I'd be fuming at the fact that Alabama is getting the benefit of the doubt. Why? Pretty simple. Brand bias. There's a massive brand bias there with Alabama. It's not like they look overly impressive. Was Alabama looking impressive when they lost by 21 on the road to Oklahoma or Vanderbilt? Oh, but everybody has low points. Not everybody has the low points that Alabama has had. Like even Miami, when you take a look at their losses, they have lost to better teams in a more competitive fashion than what Alabama showed against Oklahoma. And not a very good team, a 6-6 football team at Oklahoma, a 6-6 team at Vanderbilt, who has not scored any more points than 40 against FBS opponents. And they played teams like Ball State, for example. Like Vanderbilt was not able to put up points against anybody except for that Alabama defense. So should Alabama be ranked 11 right now? I would argue no. And you also talk about, when you look at the games that Miami and Alabama have played against bowl-eligible football teams, in particular on the road, you are competing for a spot in the college football playoff to go and play on the road against the top 7 or 8 teams, somewhere around there, right? Okay. Alabama is 1-3 on the road against bowl-eligible teams. 1-3. 2 of those losses, by the way, barely bowl eligible. Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. How are they going to be able to handle going on the road to Notre Dame or Penn State or Ohio State? Like, are you kidding me? I don't get it. I really don't get it. And what's going to probably end up happening is if Oregon does take care of business against Penn State will fall to that 6th spot. Notre Dame will elevate to that 5 spot. And Alabama's going to go on the road to Penn State. if you can handle Vanderbilt on the road, how are you going to handle Happy Valley at night? A whiteout in Happy Valley? How are you going to be able to handle that? Like, blows my mind. The only way they're going to be able to handle that is simply from an X's and O's standpoint. Frankly, Penn State's a better matchup for Alabama than Notre Dame. Like, if I'm an Alabama fan, I want no part of Notre Dame. The way that they run the football, they utilize Riley Leonard and those running backs headlined by Jeremiah Love. Alabama ain't stopping that. So, do I care if Alabama makes a playoff from like a fan standpoint? If I am a fan of an opposing team in the playoff, if you are a fan of a team that's currently in the 12-team playoff and you're mad about Alabama being in the playoff, why? Why? Because Ole Miss, to me, has more potential than Alabama with how strong that defense can be and how strong that throwing game, that passing game can be with Jackson Dart. Versus with Alabama, it's like, okay, even if Jalen Milroe is on, there's some exploitable factors on that defense. And it's also a very 50-50 shot that Jalen Milroe is actually playing well. Like, I am a fan of a team in the college football playoff. I am not worried about Alabama. So, and ultimately, we're going to be debating flawed resumes no matter what. When it comes to Miami, it's a lack of quality wins. When it comes to Ole Miss, it's that home loss to Kentucky that's really keeping them out. And then they are missing maybe one additional quality win that they probably could have that would notch them above Alabama. But to me, having Ole Miss below Alabama is just ridiculous because when you do look at the common opponent's result, you see that Ole Miss throttled Georgia and Alabama let Georgia come back and take the lead in the fourth quarter. You saw that Ole Miss throttled South Carolina and Alabama, and they did that in Williams-Brice, by the way, and Alabama barely held off a South Carolina team that was just off of a game against Ole Miss. I'm just saying, like the two are not the same to me. Ole Miss, in a way, allowed for South Carolina to get beat by Alabama by really beating them down that bad, in a way, I guess. Maybe not. I don't know. But the point here is, when you look at the common opponents that Ole Miss and Alabama played, the only one that you can give a notch to with Alabama and Ole Miss is LSU. That's really the only difference. That is in favor for Alabama, but South Carolina is strongly in favor for Ole Miss. Georgia, strongly in favor for Ole Miss. It's like Oklahoma is strongly in favor for Ole Miss. Because if you want to say, okay, well, Alabama smoked LSU and Ole Miss, they lost to LSU in overtime on the road. Yeah, they lost to LSU. Yeah. Ole Miss also beat the crap out of Oklahoma. At least beat them comfortably. Versus Alabama got blown out. And I think that's the big difference. When you take all three of Ole Miss's losses combined, they lost by only 13 points. Albeit a couple of those to not great competition. But Alabama lost to Oklahoma, a 6-6 football team, alone by 21 points. I don't think if it was up to me, I would be ranking Miami at 11, Ole Miss at 12, South Carolina at 13. Well, you guys saw my rankings earlier because I also had the Big 12 teams up there, and that'll solve itself, right? But so that didn't really matter. But with that being said, is this an argument you should overall be super passionate about? This one in particular, no. Because they're all completely flawed resumes. Miami had their chance to get a quality win against a solid Syracuse team, which they wouldn't have gotten credit for, by the way, because even though Syracuse and Duke are solid teams, Miami's not going to get credit because they're not in this magical top 25. Miami, for example, is being told, You didn't beat a top 25 opponent, but Alabama beat Missouri. But if you line up Missouri and Duke on a neutral field, especially the Missouri team that Alabama faced with a banged-up Brady Cook early in the game and then eventually Drew Pine, Duke beats that team. So what are we talking about there when we're trying to split hairs between who has more top 25 wins? I think that the bottom line, though, is all of these resumes are so flawed that the passion should not be there. And to be honest with you, me personally, I'm an Ohio State fan. The matchup that I would prefer out of those four teams, Alabama, Miami, South Carolina, and Ole Miss, I would really prefer to play Alabama over any of those others. Call me crazy, but I don't want to face that Miami passing game that could keep them in a game, though I think that would be pretty close to an easy matchup there for my team in particular. I don't want to play that pass rush over at South Carolina and the way Lenore Sellers has been playing. Yeah, I don't want any part of that too. That'd be a headache. And I don't want to play Ole Miss because if they put it together, they're going to be one of the most potent passing offenses in America, and they also have a really good defense. So ultimately, if you are a fan of a team in the playoff, you should not be scared of Alabama. They're not doing anything whatsoever. It is impossible that Jalen Milroe puts together 4 straight playoff games that are actually good. I'm just letting you know that. The other strong debate within the college football playoff rankings is Tennessee versus Ohio State. Look, I think this could go either way, personally, when you talk about football judgment. Who is a better football team? I think everybody knows when Ohio State has played at their best this year, they are better than Tennessee's best. But what version of Ohio State are we getting? Is Tennessee starting to really turn in the right direction here with that win against Vanderbilt? I just think there's not enough data there for Tennessee late in the season to make that case that they're getting hot at the right time. They looked good against Vanderbilt. That vertical pass game was much better against Vanderbilt than it was against any other SEC opponent. Might be an indictment on it, Vanderbilt, but, Alabama lost to that team. Shout out to the Tide. But the thing I think that separates these two is Ohio State has 2 top 10 wins, while Tennessee has only beaten 2 teams in all of the Power 4 that have they've only beaten 2 teams. Let me clarify this. 2 teams in the Power 4 that have a winning record. That's all they've beaten. 2 teams in the Power 4 that have a winning record. And I'll get to SMU in a second. Just for reference, SMU has 5 of such wins. 5 wins against FBS Power 4 teams with a winning record. 7-5 or better, above 500. Tennessee's resume is just really not that good. When everybody keeps talking about the draw of the schedule that Texas got, it's not that Tennessee got the easiest draw of the schedule, but everybody who looked at Tennessee's schedule in the preseason, including me, knew that there was a very good path to 10-2. There was, you beat one of the 2 of Alabama and Georgia, and then the rest of your schedule affords you to drop another game. And that's exactly what happened. In the preseason, I picked them to beat Alabama, lose to Georgia, and I had them beating Oklahoma or losing to Oklahoma, beating Arkansas. So I had that kind of flipped, I guess. They beat Oklahoma, lost to Arkansas, but they were able to have that margin for error because they had a 2-game SEC season between Georgia and Alabama. It's the same thing with Ohio State. When you play, it ended up being these 3 games, but when you play the 2 games against Penn State and Oregon, and then Indiana was just an added bonus on top, you give yourself comfort if you split those 2 road games between Oregon and Penn State. You go on the road and beat a playoff team as long as you split it. In the preseason, I said Ohio State would beat beat Penn State and lose to Oregon. Now, of course, I didn't have Ohio State losing a second game, but It afforded them the loss in the second game, no matter how painful it was to the Buckeyes out there. Ohio State benefits from the fact that Indiana had a magical season. Ohio State is going to be the benefit of that, an 11-1 Indiana team. And that's, at the end of the day, why Ohio State got ranked above them. It's very justifiable, very reasonable, but it's also reasonable for you Tennessee fans out there to say simply, Tennessee is a better football team right now than Ohio State. Okay, I'm not going to argue with you about that. But the committee pointed to the resume. The committee said Ohio State's 2 top 10 wins is too much to ignore, and Tennessee doesn't have as much meat on their resume as Ohio State, and that's why the Tennessee Volunteers are ranked below Ohio State. Finally, this is going with the college football playoff. This could very easily come down to SMU and Alabama. Here's the thing. If Clemson beats SMU, should SMU be knocked out of the playoff? I want you guys to answer down there in the comments below. I don't think so. I think SMU should be in over Alabama. I just cited the fact that SMU has 5 wins against bowl-eligible winning record Power 4 opponents. They have beaten teams like 8-4 TCU, 9-3 Duke, for example. These are teams that are right on the cusp of being in the top 25 right now, especially Duke. So it's not like SMU has a bunch of garbage victories against unranked opponents that aren't worth anything. They have a bunch of tough victories on the road in some cases against teams that are just on the outside. And really, again, I'm going to drill this point home. What is the difference between beating Missouri with Drew Pine at quarterback and then going on the road and beating Duke? Going on to beat TCU, for example. Like, what's the big difference there? The answer really is, I think it's more impressive to beat one of those teams that actually have a quarterback who can move, right? I think SMU's resume at the top is not strong enough, which is why I feel Alabama might win this debate. But I also don't think he should be moving out an 11-1 football team who has beaten 5 teams with a winning record in the Power 4 out of the playoff because they had 1 loss, especially if it's a competitive game. So I'm going to be strong about the SMU argument because I don't believe that SMU's resume is flawed nearly the way that Miami's and Ole Miss and South Carolina and Alabama's are. So I'm going to be banging the table for SMU to make the playoff. I will not care if you miss the playoff. If you're a Miami, South Carolina, or Ole Miss fan, I will care if you're an SMU fan out there if you may miss the playoff, because I quite honestly think that's garbage. All right. Transfer portal chaos is going on everywhere, and I just want to talk about this real quick. I think the biggest prize right now in the transfer portal is going to be Casey Concepcion from NC State. He's a do-it-all type of player, very versatile at the wide receiver position. It's going to be interesting to see where he ends up. I also saw that there's going to be a lot of stuff with Julian Humphrey. Julian Humphrey is going to be down to a projected, I believe it was 4 schools involved in that. I think it was like Alabama, Oregon, Texas A&M. I got it right here, so we're going to see here in a second. Alabama, Oregon, Texas A&M, Miami, and Texas. Those are going to be the 5 schools competing for Julian Humphreys, while you have Colorado, Alabama, Auburn, Penn State, and Kansas State going for Concepcion. Now, the thing that I caught the most flack for is I said Miller Moss was not going to be a great quarterback, and he hasn't been a great quarterback at USC. Well, I had a bunch of Michigan fans telling me how good he was. Should have known that there was a little bit of smoke there, because it looks like Michigan, along with Auburn, Iowa, and Louisville, are pursuing him. But isn't it fascinating, though, that you're taking a look at who is pursuing Miller Moss here? And you understand that all 4 of those teams are very desperate for a quarterback. Auburn has no plan beyond Peyton Thorne. Louisville has no plan beyond Tyler Shuck, and they just got the news that Colin Lacey's coming back, so that's great for them. And then Michigan isn't just an absolute disaster at the quarterback position, and then Iowa is the other. I don't even need to talk about Iowa's quarterbacks for you guys to understand. So clearly, Miller Moss is not that great of a quarterback, because if he was, then you would see some bigger name schools wanting to go after him. Say like a Georgia, for example, who's still really like they're probably going to go with Gunnar Stockton, but who really doesn't have a guy for next year. I don't know. I don't think the kid is all that good. I think there are a couple of players that you're going to see in the portal, including a guy like Connor Wakeman, who just entered, much better prospect. Now, Jimbo might have ruined him in his short time with Connor Wakeman, but Connor Wakeman, to me, could be much better at his top end than Miller Moss. Could be. I'm just saying that straight out there. Other guys that entered the portal, you had Gabe Powers from Ohio State enter into the portal. Jamar Curtis, a Lafayette running back, he's entered into the portal. Then you get a couple of Texas A&M guys, a defensive lineman and an offensive lineman that started 8 games. Jamari Butler, a game wrecker against Ohio State for Nebraska, entered the portal. Chase Sowell, a good wide receiver, not great, from the group of 5 ranks out of East Carolina. A Grand Valley State defensive end, and Niles King. He's going to be a guy that draws a lot of power forward attention. He's really, really good. 20 career sacks at D2 Grand Valley State. I think he's going to play at the power forward level and be rather productive at that level. Then you also got an offensive lineman at Stanford. It just sounds, when you hear offensive lineman at Stanford transferring it, that was a starter, really good player, it just sounds like a Michigan transfer, doesn't it? His name, by the way, is Luke Baklenko. I think I said that right. Baklenko. I'm going to say it like that. Okay. Whatever. Anyway, Prince William Milan has entered the transfer portal. Star freshman running back out of UL Monroe. His name is Ahmad Hardy. He's entered the transfer portal. And then you also got Ronald Triplett trying to follow the shoes of Trey Moore last year at UTSA. He's entered the portal. Not as productive as Trey Moore, but still a really good player there. CJ Daniels, after Caden Salter entered the portal yesterday, CJ Daniels is following suit. I'm interested to see if Caden Salter and CJ Daniels are going to go to the same location. Mikey Keene, who played at Fresno State this year, he's entered the transfer portal. Cyrus Allen, a productive wide receiver for Texas A&M, he's entered into the portal as well. And then finally, the recent stuff, Kobe Prentice from Alabama, wide receiver, then a wide receiver, Troy Stellato from Clemson, and wide receiver Jaden Ballard from Ohio State. They've all entered the transfer portal. Watch out, by the way, Grambling State linebacker Andrew Jones. He's in the portal. He's going to be really good. And then, like I said, a big thing, Cullen Lacey coming back for Louisville. There was a lot of speculation around whether or not he'd go to the NFL draft. That's big for Louisville. They win that one. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.